Hi, everybody. Welcome to the first episode of Headbangers Book Club. My name is Zach. You want to
And
introduce
I'm
yourself?
Kelly.
And this isn't really our first episode. There's probably most of the people listening to this have already heard us. We used to be called Dystopian Book Club, and then we decided that that was not doing our brand any favors because it sounds like we're reading 1984 or Brave New World or whatever. So we changed our name and we launched a new podcast. So if you're new, then welcome. If you've been listening to us, then this is basically the same shit that you've been listening to. But since there are presumably going to be some new people, let's step back a little bit and introduce ourselves a little bit more. So first of all, we're brother and sister. I was born in '84. Callie was born in '91. So we grew up together. We're from Michigan, and we both kind of came of age during the heyday of, I consider it the heyday of like trashy rock biographies.
Yeah, it was
The
VH1 era,
yeah,
really.
the
Like
late
VH1's heyday.
yeah, late '90s, early 2000s. I can think of so many times when we were home from school, just like marathoning behind the music or whatever else, and
And
then
Rock of Love was on, and
yeah. It was just like the golden age of just shitty rock culture, and we've always both been into a lot of older music. Um, I got into the Beatles when I was like 11, 10 or 11. And then from the Beatles, kind of that became a gateway for a lot of other music, including Led Zeppelin, which is what we're talking about today. So basically, we just read a lot of garbage about rock bands, and we enjoy this, and we also don't enjoy it. So like, there's a one thing that I want to warn you about up front if you've never listened to us before. These are not going to be reverent discussions of these classic texts.
yeah, this
Uh,
isn't Eddie Trunk and
yeah, we're
I
not.
don't know,
It's not.
someone else.
Yeah. We do genuinely, I think, like the music almost all the time. I don't think we've read a book by or about someone that we don't like their music. But we don't always like the people, and even if we like them, we don't always respect them. So
We never respect
yeah, we
them.
never respect them. So if you're coming here expecting us to just like, you know, swoon over how amazing Led Zeppelin were, I mean, I'm sure we'll say some nice stuff, but we're also gonna, our brand is fairly irreverent. So just take that as a warning.
I mean, the typical misogynistic rock fan is not going to like this podcast, so you might as well tune out now because
Yeah.
about it. Conservatively, three-fourths of this book is rape,
Yeah.
attempted rape, statutory rape, sometimes bestiality,
Yeah.
and we're not going to excuse that.
Yeah, we're
So,
not we don't
like,
condone any of those things, shockingly. So a little bit of the history here. We started doing this about what, like 5 years ago, five and some
I think
change.
it was 2017,
Yeah, we
or
started reading
2016.
all of the Kiss biographies. For those who don't know, every individual member of Kiss wrote their own biography, and they're all kind of take snipes and pot shots at each other in the biographies. And at some point, we were like, what if we got to the bottom of this and really like read each one in order and cross-reference them? We didn't actually do anything that systematic, but we did read all of them, and it was a miserable experience, but also a delightful one. I think we got a lot of joy out of it, and that's how a lot of people found us. At first, it was mostly people telling us to kill ourselves. And then I think we won the grudging respect and admiration when we not only refused to kill ourselves, but continued to inflict punishment on ourselves by reading other books of similar caliber. So if you're on the Headbangers Book Club feed, you can find all of these old episodes. There's the Kiss ones, so that's Gene Simmons, Kiss and Makeup, Ace Frehley's No Regrets, Peter Criss's Make Up to Break Up, and Paul Stanley's Face the Music. We read both Rick James memoirs.
I
Both,
forgot there were two of those.
yeah.
So this isn't the first time we've read two books.
This is the second double header. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the Confessions of Rick James and Glow, which was like the version that was actually edited. So we read both of those. We did David Lee Roth, Crazy from the Heat.
Which was not edited.
Which was also not edited, yeah.
Or at least it seemed that way.
Yeah.
If I was going to kill myself after anything, it was going to be after reading just hours and hours of text on the most boring depictions of like hotel shenanigans.
Yeah, it was like how do you write it?
Not in chronological order.
Yeah, how do you write about destroying a hotel room as if it's a textbook? That's so yeah, I've never identified more with the Van Halen brothers than when we read Crazy from the Heat. We read a book about Mark Bolan, The Rise and Fall of a 20th Century Superstar by Mark Patras. We read The Dirt by Motley Crue. We did a bonus episode about The Dirt when they turned it into a movie. And then most recently, which was it was over 2 years ago, was George Clinton's Brothers Be Like, Yo Like, Brothers, I always fuck this up. Brothers Be, Yo Like George, Ain't That Funkin' Kinda Hard on You. I have to say it in like a rhythm to get it right.
I always think it's Brothers Be Like Yo.
Yeah.
But the yo is in a different place than I expect it to be.
Right. That's what trips me up. Exactly. So yeah, it's been a while. We took a year off and for some reason watched every Mike Myers movie in order. I don't know. I couldn't. I feel like I had a good explanation for why we did that, and having done that, I no longer have a good explanation because there is no good explanation. So, but now we're back and we're doing the stuff that people actually want to hear from us. It's a new era of us actually doing things that people like. And I thought, what better way to sort of relaunch the book club than with Led Zeppelin, which is, one of the biggest and dumbest rock bands in the history of big, dumb rock. We've got two books here that we're talking about that are sort of canonical in the world of big, dumb rock books. The first is Hammer of the Gods, the Led Zeppelin saga by Stephen Davis. And the second is Stairway to Heaven, Led Zeppelin Uncensored by Richard Cole and somebody.
Richard Trubo. This book was written by two
dicks. So that's what we decided to do. And I wanted to do the double because we knew Stairway to Heaven had some good content in it because we read it years ago.
Yeah, I got this when I was in high school. I think I was in 9th grade, so that would have been in 2009? No, 2007 or something like that. And I still have, this is my copy that I had back then, and I have the index circled, notable parts of the index circled, and later I'd like to get into that. Before we start talking about our analysis of the book, I want to just go down the index and cover what parts I've circled.
Yeah. So yeah, and then I think I might have read it. I might have borrowed it from you or something. I know.
Yeah, because I read it and I was like, this is fucking ridiculous. Yeah. And so then you borrowed it.
Yeah. But so we knew that was going to be some quality content. When I say quality content, I mean to talk about. It is not a good book by any measure. There's no world in which, unless the quality that you judge books on is the amount of objects grown men shit into. There's no measure that of quality that you could apply to Stairway to Heaven. So
it is also over 300 pages long. So I read this when I was in high school, and then I could not fucking bring myself to finish it again. I couldn't.
And I don't blame you because it's have you ever tried to read the 120 Days of Sodom by the Marquis de Sade? Because this is like that. It just becomes
really boring. Yeah. But also weird sex stuff.
Yeah, it's just a list of depravities. You zone out after a while.
But I'll tell you what though, a couple, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, I read Atlas Shrugged, and this was after I graduated from high school. You know, in high school we had to read The Fountainhead.
Right. Because we went to a conservative high school.
Yeah, exactly. And I just read Atlas Shrugged by myself. Like, I was already in college at this point, and I was just interested in it. I do not like Ayn Rand, but I was just interested in reading it because I don't know. Sometimes I just hate reading stuff. That's the basis of our podcast.
The whole story. Yeah.
So that book is also a book about selfish rich people and also involves a woman enjoying being raped, but it is almost 4 times as long, and I still finished that book and could not finish this one. So
yeah, it's a ringing endorsement. What I'm trying to say is we knew about Stairway to Heaven. We knew we wanted to talk about it, but I also wanted to, because Hammer of the Gods is like the book that it's like the book of record for Led Zeppelin. I read an interview with Robert Plant in Mojo a couple of weeks ago, and he said, like, he kind of like made a self-deprecating joke about how he doesn't remember anything. And he said that he had to get out his copy of Hammer of the Gods to remember what happened when he was recording the 1971 album. So it's like it's like The Dirt. It's like one of those canonical texts for big dumb rock books. And I thought, okay, well, this is perfect. We're bringing back the podcast after 2 years. We're launching it under a new banner. We'll read Hammer of the Gods and we'll read Stairway to Heaven. Long story short, neither of us, like, spoiler alert, neither of us read Stairway to Heaven. Kelly got the farthest. I got a couple pages in, and then we were talking, and we were like, what if we each read one book? And then, like...
Yeah, that was my way of getting out of work, and then I still wasn't able to finish the work that I assigned myself.
And I was like...
But I read it like 15 years ago. That's enough. I know what the fuck happened.
I think the important parts will never...
Richard's in jail, Bonham dies, spoiler alert, we all know it.
Yeah.
Like...
Yeah, I think the important parts will stick in your head whether you want them to or not. That's the thing about these books. So I had already read Hammer of the Gods at that point, so it was like, all right, I'll come to the table with Hammer of the Gods. Callie will come to the table with Stairway to Heaven, and we'll sort of compare notes. So this might be an unwieldy episode. This is, in some ways, this is a bad way to launch the podcast because I read Hammer of the Gods like 2 months ago. Neither of us finished Stairway to Heaven. And Callie at least took a lot of notes. She has a lot of bookmarks in her book, but most of them are like, what the fuck? And like,
honestly, most of them are, this did not happen. or not even like, whatever, maybe it happened, but the detail with which Richard Cole writes that these things happen in the dialogue, and keeping in mind that this man was like constantly binge drinking, right, and like constantly high. Like,
it was 40 years ago when he wrote. It
was 40 years ago, and he'll remember like down to little puns, right, or like quippy little remarks that people said that are just and they're corny too. Like these corny little things that people will say. I'll point some out when we get to that, but it's like, no, he didn't fucking say that.
Yeah.
It's written as if it's fan fiction.
Yeah.
Like, this is Richard Cole's fan fiction about Led Zeppelin.
That he got published.
And maybe it's based in fact, but I don't believe, like, the dialogue is surely made up.
Yeah.
Like, unless he was documenting everything, like, which he fucking wasn't, because like we were just talking about before we started recording, they got robbed and Richard didn't even know how much money they had. Like... No, they didn't say that. So that's what a lot of my notes are.
Yeah.
It's literally just a page number that leads you to the bookmark, and then right next to the page number it says, no one said that.
Well, a fun fact...
Said no one.
A fun fact about Stairway to Heaven is that I did, when I started reading it, before we came up with the plan that we were each going to read only one book, I've opened it up, and literally the first sentence is a factual error about the Beatles, like which is
something you can research.
Yeah, which is extra
like,
funny.
That's not even a personal account.
Yeah, it's not about
like...
the book is not about the Beatles. There was no reason for him to make that factual error. But he wrote something like, and I mean, I'm gonna put on my Beatles nerd hat. Maybe not everybody listening to this knows this, but
do you want me to just read the passage?
Yeah, read the passage.
Is it just that?
It's the first. It's the very first sentence of the book. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right out the gate, he's fucking up.
Here it is. On New Year's Day, 1962, when the Beatles walked into Decca's West Hampstead studio number 3 on Broadhurst Gardens, rock music was forever changed. By the time they finished recording an audition tape, with Paul McCartney crooning "Till There Was You" and John Lennon warbling "To Know Him Is to Love Him," the Beatles had climbed aboard a musical fast track that literally revolutionized the cultural and social fabric stretching from Abbey Road to Hollywood and Vine.
Yeah, so literally all Richard Cole would have had to do. So I mean, like, this is one of the most famous stories in, like, I realize not everybody is obsessed with the Beatles, but this is one of the most famous stories in rock and roll history, that they auditioned for Decca, and the guy, the A&R guy at Decca, said that guitar groups are on the way out, or some line like that. And literally all you would have to do to fact check that is pull a Beatles album off the shelf and check the label to see if it says Decca on it. Guess what? It doesn't. They were famously signed to EMI. So I don't expect everybody to be obsessed with the Beatles, but I do expect you, if you put it in a fucking book that's not even about the Beatles, to know, like, what the fuck? Like, that is, it's almost like, how did he know what they recorded at the audition, but he didn't know the fact that it was not a successful audition? Like, it's confusing.
This is, we're kind of jumping all over the place, but I just wanted to add one more thing. There's a point where he mentions Steve Marriott, and he just, like, which, by the way, Steve Marriott is, like, created the Robert Plant voice.
Right.
Like, let's be honest.
Yeah, right.
Steve Marriott is the reason that Robert Plant has his, like, vocal tone, and I don't even want to argue about it because I'm more of a Steve Marriott fan than I am a Robert Plant fan.
Yeah.
Anyway, he mentions him, and he says something about how, like, Steve Marriott is known for saying, "How's your bird's lumbago?" Which is just like a kind of a throwaway line from a Small Faces song. Like, no, the fuck, Steve Marriott is not known for saying that. No, that is something he did, but it's not, like, when I think about Steve Marriott, I'm not like, oh yeah, the dude who said his bird's lumbago, that dude, yeah. It's so dumb.
Yeah, shockingly, I know that, you would think that Richard Cole would be a fantastic wordsmith. His book is not good. And that kind of brings me to this was a miscalculation on our part. I did not realize when we decided to read both of those books, I did not realize that they're both basically about Richard Cole. Like, I knew obviously that Richard Cole wrote Stairway to Heaven. What I did not know was that he was, like, the primary source for Hammer of the Gods. And so a lot of the stories are the same. And also, if you know anything about either of these books, you know that most of the, like, famous stories, like the red snapper / mud shark, whatever you want to call it, the incident at the Edgewater Hotel,
both of them are foul. So
in Seattle, they're all Richard Cole. Like, he honestly, most of the fucked up things that Led Zeppelin did was actually Richard Cole and maybe one or two other members of Led Zeppelin.
But it's also, like, maybe, and that could be true, but you also got to remember that Richard Cole is writing this, so every suggestion is his. Every good suggestion. Right. Oh, you should do this, I said. No, the fuck you didn't. Like,
he's the true genius.
Like, every idea is his. So, like, yeah, maybe, like, maybe some of this stuff happened, maybe it didn't. Like, who even knows?
Yeah.
But, like, Richard Cole is the impetus of everything, but he's also the writer of the fucking book. So, like, right. how can you believe him?
Yeah, he's maybe not the most reliable narrator. Yeah, so, we thought we were reading two Led Zeppelin books. We're really reading two Richard Cole books featuring Led Zeppelin. And
barely so, especially halfway. I'm at the point, because I didn't finish this book, I'm at the point where Led Zeppelin barely even features. They are just, like, added dialogue to corroborate Richard's story, right, that he didn't rob them.
The book starts, like, aside from the whole Beatles thing, the book starts, like, in media res of him in prison. Where is he? Like, Thailand or something?
I think he's in Italy. Okay. He got arrested in allegedly false charges. And he's in jail when he finds out Bonham dies. That's the first
he's
chapter.
Like detoxing from heroin in a jail cell. So, he's definitely a character. I think we'll talk about Richard Cole more in a minute. The other thing that I wanted to get out of the way first is like I will admit that this could be a failure of the books that we've read, a failure of like representing. And I know that the members of Led Zeppelin are not crazy about either of these books, and certainly, about Hammer of the Gods. So, I'm not saying that like these books are definitely accurate representations and everything in them is true, but from reading these two, 1.5 to 2 books, I came away from it honestly like hating every member of Led Zeppelin. And I don't know if it's a failure of the books or a failure of them as human beings. I imagine it's a little bit of both. I'm willing to give John Paul Jones and Robert Plant a little bit of a benefit of the doubt because they seem like slightly less reprehensible than Jimmy Page and John Bonham. But like it's not even just the, like Kelly said, basically every other page is some new sex crime in these books. So it's not even just that. It's
There's just okay, here's a fun game. Who's your least favorite and why?
Oh, it's for me. It's Jimmy Page, hands down.
That's
he's
what
a
I was gonna say.
Cunt. Like I hate him. And I think I hate him the most out of anybody we've talked to, including all 4 members of Kiss. I came away from Gene Simmons' book feeling more inclined to respect Gene Simmons as a human being than Jimmy Page. Jimmy Page he's just like the worst, like he's a like edgelord, like a 30-year-old man who's like obsessed with collecting Aleister Crowley artifacts. He's
obsessed with fucking teenage
he's a
girls
misogynist.
who are not even like they're teenagers, but like they're like baby teenagers,
right?
Like not even like 17. And I'm not saying it's okay to have sex with a 17-year-old. It's not, but it's like even worse to have sex with a 14-year-old
and to seek them out. Like they even say, like he had from very early on, he had a reputation for like liking young girls, and it's obviously a power thing because he doesn't like women. He comes right out and says it at one point in the book this is a quote from a magazine that he was, an actual interview that he gave. It wasn't like a Richard Cole quote where he just pulled it out of his ass. He's the fucking worst. He's a plagiarist. He sucks. Jimmy Page, you suck.
And he's also just a weak human being. Like, at least, like, Richard Cole and Bonham can be assholes and they can back it up. But Jimmy Page sprained his finger on a fence. He's just the worst piece of shit. It's like he needs people like Richard Cole around him to protect him because he has such a weak constitution.
Yeah,
he's such a little bitch. Like, yeah, I was thinking you were going to say someone different and then we would each have a different one, but instead we're in perfect agreement.
He sucks. And he's also like, this is like a classic separating the art from the artist thing because Jimmy Page is also like the genius behind 90% of Led Zeppelin's music. Like
I love some of their riffs.
Yeah.
I just would also love to punch Jimmy face in his fucking face.
Yeah.
And he looks like an elderly woman now.
I would still do it. I'd still do it. Yeah. Any day, Jimmy.
Without a second thought.
And we could kick his ass. Like, and I don't say that about most people. I'm not a fighter.
Oh yeah, like I
John Bonham
like,
would fucking destroy me. Like, there's no
right. Like without question, I even think that Robert Plant could kick our asses.
Yeah.
But Jimmy Page, I could snap him in half with no problem at all.
Yeah, he's always like ill. They have to like cut all these tours short because of his constitution, which like that's not, for anybody out there, we've gotten in trouble before for picking on people. Anybody out there, with weak constitutions, I'm not talking about you.
I have a weak constitution, but I'm not a little bitch. Yeah, exactly. There's a difference.
And that Mojo article I mentioned, Page was still a fucking wet blanket in that. He was still complaining about like Rolling Stone reviews that they got 50 years ago. And you're in the like #2 best-selling band of all time. Like, fuck off. But they all kind of suck. Like that's like none of them have really a personality. Like I've seen in other interviews, Robert Plant can be like a raconteur and he seems like he might actually be like an interesting person to spend time with. That did not come across in this book. I'll tell you that.
But I think that's because Richard hated it.
Yeah.
And honestly, the people that Richard hated, I had the most respect for. Because I like fully have respect for Robert Plant. He's the only one who came out of this with any respect, because the way that Richard writes about him too, also just don't fucking believe it.
Right.
Because if anyone's gonna be whiny, it's gonna be Jimmy Page, but he writes about him like he's this like great guy. But Robert Plant, like, there's one part where like they stayed at this dude ranch and then they got chased off. And he was saying how Robert Plant was like walking or like pouncing about saying, I need to have my tea before we leave. And I'm like, I don't think that happened, because they were like allegedly in fear for their lives. And I don't know the guy, but I can't see the man who wrote Big Log doing that. That's
yeah, exactly. I already went through my burning animus of Jimmy Page, which I'm sure will come up again. John Paul Jones is like fine. Like I probably identify the most with John Paul Jones because he was literally just like, he treated it like a fucking job. He was just like, well, I'm gonna go to the studio with Led Zeppelin, and then I'm gonna go home and spend time with my wife, and maybe have sex with a drag queen while we're in New Orleans or whatever. Like he's there's not a lot of hijinks with John Paul Jones. He's boring. But I think in a band like Led Zeppelin, being boring is almost like a virtue.
I also, again, like, he is barely mentioned because he wasn't constantly hanging out with Richard Cole. So it's like, we don't even, I mean, I think that hanging out with drag queens is way more interesting than, I don't know, driving a car into the water. Because that's just fucking stupid.
Yeah, and then John Bonham is, he's the source, like, of all the band members. Like I said earlier, that a lot of these stories are actually Richard Cole. They're Richard Cole and John Bonham. But even John Bonham, it's like none of these guys have very compelling personalities. John Bonham's personality is drunk. Like, that's literally the only, like, he's just and they always try to paint this picture of him like, oh, he was a gentle giant, He would just fly into rages because he loved his family so much. I'm like, what? Like, what the fuck does that even mean? He wanted to go home so he would shit in somebody's purse.
Yeah, his wife's shoe instead of Jimmy's girlfriend's shoe.
Right. He's a piece of shit.
Okay, so marry, fuck, kill. Marry John Paul Jones.
Yeah.
Fuck Robert Plant. Kill
Jimmy Page.
Everyone else.
I think that's I think I've got the same answer. Yeah. It's the only possible answer. And and that's the fucked up thing, is that the two people that I have the most respect for musically, because John Bonham is probably my favorite drummer of all time. He's amazing. Like, and I recently started playing the drums again after it's probably been 10 years since I played the drums last time. And I started playing again, and I'm listening to his parts, and you listen to the beginning of Good Times, Bad Times, and there's all this tricky stuff that he's doing with the bass drum. And at first I was like, oh, he must have a double bass, because they had those in 1969. No, he's doing it with one pedal. It's it honestly almost made me just want to give up and never play drums again, because I'm like, I'll never be able to do that. I don't know what it is. You really do have to separate the art from the artist, because him and Page are just absolute wastes of fucking skin, and yet they're the reason why Led Zeppelin made good music.
And my thing too. Okay, so the stuff about Jimmy Page, I don't know if everything is true that Richard Cole said about him, but the things about him being a pedophile. And
that's all in the public record. That's all been documented.
Yeah, that's true. So it's those things about him are whack. The thing about John Bonham is did he really shit in multiple women's shoes?
That is true. There is one source for this, and his name is Richard. And as we've established, he is not a reliable narrator. So that is fair.
Because honestly, other than those very damning stories, the only other thing about John Bonham is that he was kind of a loose cannon and a drunk, which is I don't care about that. It's just the things that make him seem psychotic that Richard Cole writes about. Those are the things that I'm like, this dude was not okay. Yeah. But if he was just a drunk, it's that's every rock star.
Yeah.
So
I remember
I don't care about that.
I texted Callie while we were reading these books, and I had just watched. Sometimes I like to have music documentaries on while I'm working sometimes, and I half pay attention to them. And I watched this one about Leonard Skinner. It was not a great documentary. I couldn't understand what anybody said. Everybody had these really thick Florida accents. But what I did pick up was that one of the guys from Skinner shat in somebody's shoe, I think. And I texted Kelly about it. I was like, there is a shoe shitting incident in this Skinner movie.
Yeah.
And Kelly was
And
like,
I texted back, "Are rock stars okay?"
yeah, like what the fuck?
What is going on? Like that wouldn't even cross my mind.
Right. I do think it is.
And I like practical jokes of leaving stuff for people to find. Like that's one of my things, but I would
But
never
not human
shit in somebody's
waste.
shoe. Yeah, like that's taking it a step, quite a few steps too far.
Yeah, it is like I do think that something about like being too famous and having all of your needs catered to and just being in a state of arrested development, which is what, almost all rock stars, if not all rock stars are, it does create this like it's something akin to insanity, if not literally insanity. And you see that in Led Zeppelin. Like one of the things that in Hammer of the Gods that I thought was interesting, he talks about, because Hammer of the Gods is actually, I mean, it's not like the most incredible book, but it's written by somebody who actually writes for a living, so it's already better than Stairway to Heaven. And he talks about how this was an English rock band, but their audience was primarily in America. They were much bigger in the US than they were in the UK. And when Led Zeppelin came to America, they treated it as like a fantasy world, like there were no consequences for anything. Like America didn't count. They could, jam fish up women's vaginas and shit in people's purses
Yeah,
and
half of this book is honestly Richard Cole getting kind of annoyed at service workers for being understandably upset that they have to clean up their sometimes literal shit like all the time. It's like he's like, "Oh, can't they take a joke?" No, they can't, because you're getting paid like $200,000 like minimum a night, and they're getting paid whatever the fuck minimum wage was in the 70s, probably close
similar to what
it
it is now. Yeah.
Yeah, to clean up human waste every night.
And this was also during the peak of like rock excess. So like the night after Led Zeppelin comes through town, Joe Walsh might come through town, and then the night after that it might be Keith Moon. And so like just think about these fucking hotel, like working in a hotel in the 70s must have been the worst job, because you're just constantly picking up shards of TVs that have been thrown out the window, or like taking furniture that was nailed on the ceiling, taking it off.
It's funny that you say that, because I actually watched this morning. I was watching this it was Vice,
yeah,
but it was this Vice video about this guy who worked in luxury hotels, and he was talking about like sex parties that like super rich people throw, and it sounded similar to this. There was like waste all over the ceiling, and so I don't know, like the things have changed that much since the 70s, because the super rich act like the rock stars do.
Yeah,
so.
Right. Yeah, it's just that we don't even have the they don't even have the decency to give us like an immigrant song or a Black Dog or whatever. Like now it's all the same fucking misbehavior, but none of the artistic achievements.
Just real quickly, I just want to run through what I highlighted in the index.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
This is in alphabetical order.
This is why we read this book. Like this rate, the index is 100% of the reason why we wanted to do this.
Okay, so first of all, alcohol and drug use.
Yeah.
Blackouts and disorientation. Automobile accidents. There's many entries for that. Handcuffing episode. Mischief and pranks. Bugging of technician's bedroom. That was just more rape stuff.
Right.
There's one that says Chuck Berry incident involving. Demolishing his hotel suite. Gun pointing incident. Jeff Beck incident involving. Everyone who's mentioned
it's always an incident. It's like you're reading a police report. Like
kicking dents in Rolls Royce. Pissing in his pants.
That's bottom, right?
Yes.
I mean, you almost don't have to ask.
Yeah, well, that's followed that like some of these, they skip lines, but this is literally directly following that is shitting incidents, and then following that is shitting in shoe incident. So there were multiple shitting incidents, but there was one shitting in shoe incident. The other one was a purse.
Right. Yes.
Throwing the hotel refrigerator into the ocean, throwing television sets out of hotel windows, urinating on a disc jockey in Tokyo, which, like, we'll get more into this, but, like, I wanted to go to Japan the last 2 years, and the fact that these absolute just fuckwads got to go and they were just pissing on people,
and there's definitely, like, again, we're, like, we're social justice warriors and millennial cucks and all of that stuff. So, just know that coming into this. There's definitely like a racial dimension to this. To like, it reminds me of when Motley Crue went apeshit.
That's when they beat that guy with a
It's like you go to it's like the thing about them there being no rules in America, but then multiply that because they're also in a place where people are not white. So anyway.
Right. So they can go there and piss on everyone. I mean, I guess this was 40 years ago. I just want to go buy some anime.
Right.
Starship bathroom incident. That was when John Bonham got cemented onto the bathroom in their private jet because there was like something wrong with the toilet. So when the plane took off, there was suction coming out, and his ass was stuck on the toilet.
Yeah.
In case you're wondering what the Starship bathroom is now. Shark episode.
That's the infamous Frank Zappa sang about. Yeah.
Imprisoned in Italy. Mischief and pranks. Copenhagen bathroom incident, I believe.
I don't remember that one.
Oh, maybe I'm wrong, but I believe that was the one that the woman took them into the bathroom to give them blowjobs, and Richard ended up going first, allegedly. I don't believe it because I feel like if I was a woman doling out blowjobs, I would initially go to Robert Plant instead of the bear-looking motherfucker that's Richard Cole. But maybe that's just my that's just what I would do. But allegedly, she took Richard Cole into the bathroom and was sucking his penis, and then Robert Plant could not wait.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
What was probably like a minute for Richard Cole to finish, and he busted the door and tore Richard Cole's ass.
Ass tearing incident. That's what it is.
Yeah, I'm surprised that's not in here. Ledge walking incident in Paris. Do you know what that is?
No, I don't think so.
That's when Richard Cole he couldn't wake John Bonham up, so he just went out on the ledge, and they thought he was a terrorist or something. So he inched back into the room, and the cops came up.
Yeah. Okay.
It was fucking stupid. So much of this stuff is just fucking
vaguely
stupid.
Familiar.
Punching incident at Nobody's. That's the club in New York City in Greenwich Village. Tearing dress off Cole's girlfriend. In prison, I guess a second incident from, yeah. Released from prison. I don't know why I circled this, probably just because it was Phil Collins, but I circled Collins Phil. There's no incident involving him, though.
Sadly.
He's just mentioned in the book.
Sadly. I think he filled in for Bonham at Live Aid, right? Isn't that...
Probably. Yeah. I don't remember because I didn't get to that fucking part. And then... I don't remember why this is at all, but Downey Robert Jr. is mentioned in the book. And then drug and alcohol use. C, alcohol and drug use. Just in case. Why is it written both?
Right.
Drugs. Gay bars. Geraldo Rivera show. Great Dane incident. I feel like that's probably...
I'm sure somebody fucked a Great Dane or sucked it off or jerked it off.
I think they tried to get the Great... You know what? I remember it. They tried to get a Great Dane. They invited this teenage girl up to their room.
Right.
And they were like, oh, I got this Great Dane who wants to eat you out or whatever. And she said, haha, I guess I'll try. Which, I don't even think that's how it went down. They were always like, oh, the girl was totally into it. No, the fuck she was.
There were five...
I wasn't there.
There were five giant men standing over her, you know?
Yeah, come on. And so they, put peanut butter on her vagina, which, first of all, that sounds like a yeast infection.
Yeah, oh, God.
And the dog did not eat her out. And then Richard Cole made a hilarious joke about how, like, oh, she was prettier, the dog, blah, blah, blah. It's like, yeah, I'm sure this dog has similar beauty standards to Richard fucking Cole.
I think the dog had more self-respect than anybody else in that room. The dog is the hero
literally
of this
anyone
story.
else. Not even Peanut Butter would have. It's just so gross.
Yeah.
Hawaii dick shots. Was that mentioned in
I like. I gotta say,
was that very important? That story that's so important to the lore of Led Zeppelin, was that mentioned in Hammer
I
of the
gotta
Gods?
say, I don't think so. Like with the caveat that Hammer of the Gods does not have anywhere near as colorful an index as Stairway to Heaven. So maybe I read it and just like skimmed over it, but I'm pretty sure that is not in fact. He had to save some exclusives for his own book, so.
Yeah. Well, you want to know what happened?
I imagine that they took shots of their dicks in Hawaii.
Yep. They were on vacation and they were taking a whole bunch of pictures, and they got bored, as you know, as you do.
Every story is like
taking a whole bunch.
Starts with them getting bored, and they get bored very easily
and
very quickly.
Yeah, for people who get to, I know they say like, oh, touring is you don't get to see very much. These motherfuckers were taking tours. They were going out at night. It wasn't like they were stuck in the hotel room. They were doing all types of stuff, and then they would be going on like art tours and like going to museums and stuff, and they'd be like, oh, I'm bored. Let's just get drunk and call some hookers over. And then they would call the hookers over, and they would get bored because they're like, oh, we always have hookers. Oh my god, like y'all aren't satisfied with anything. But anyway, in this situation, they were in Hawaii, and they started taking a whole bunch of pictures, and that devolved into them taking pictures of themselves and each other's dicks. And
why is it always dicks? This reminds me of the dicks on the shoulders in Peter Criss's book. Like it's
because straight men are gay as hell. And so yeah, they use John Paul Jones' camera, took a bunch of pictures of dicks, and then they were going through the pictures from Hawaii like months later in a slideshow, and all of their family was there. I don't know what this was, that like everyone's family was there, and they were just like, oh, here's this on vacation. And of course forgot about the dick shots. The dick shots pop up on TV, on whatever.
The slide projector or whatever,
TV,
yeah.
The slide projector, yeah. And that's it. That's the story. And then the next day, John Paul Jones' wife, Mo Jones, this is another situation where I'm like, did they have Richard Cole on three-way? Like, how did he know this shit? Allegedly, Mo Jones called Maureen Plant and said, oh, I saw a lovely photograph of your husband last night taken in Hawaii. Absolutely lovely. How the fuck did he know that? He didn't know that she said that.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's Hawaii dick shots. And that's it.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, there's one more. Turd burgers. I literally don't know.
It could have been a title for the book.
I did not get to page 308, so I don't know.
If I ever start a band, it's going to be called Hawaii Dick Shots. I'll tell you that.
I thought you were going to say Turd Burglars, because that is a band.
Okay, that makes sense.
Well, it's a band that Robert Plant asked if he could jam with.
Oh yeah, that's actually ringing a bell. I think they actually talked about that in Hammer of the Gods too. So I feel like that's actually going through the index is a good way to go through to talk about Richard Cole's book, because it's just like a litany of, like I said, it's 120 Days of Sodom, but rock and roll. Like, it's just a list of things that happen that are mostly involving underage girls and like depravities. Like, it's just fucked up. We should probably talk a little bit. I feel like if you're listening to this, you probably know who Richard Cole is, but I guess we can step back a little bit and talk about him. He's basically, as I said, we watched all of Mike Myers movies last year, and I kept thinking about Del Preston, the like super roadie character from Wayne's World 2. He's basically that guy in real life. Only like even more oafish and less, maybe slightly less drug-addled, but more dangerous in many ways. He was a roadie. He started out, I think, working with some bands in the 60s. I think he worked with The Who. He worked with the Yardbirds, which is how he got to know Jimmy Page, and then he was the main like road manager for Led Zeppelin. And while he never, to our knowledge, beat an Indonesian shopkeeper to death with his shoes, he absolutely would have if there was a situation where it was required. He's just he's a low life like. I say all this fully aware that I'm speaking ill of the dead. He recently passed away. What was that
I think it was
last
last
year?
year.
Oh, it was December. It was December 2021 actually. So
Oh,
very
okay.
very recently.
Oh.
Yeah,
Oh,
he like just died. So, rest in peace, but also what a piece of shit. um, uh, like I said, he's the inciter of the, like John Bonham, like Callie said, is a loose cannon, but Richard Cole is always on the side, like goading him. Like, you would think if a guy can't handle his liquor and will just like fly off the handle and do something, unpredictable and possibly violent, you would think that that would be something you'd want to avoid. But Richard
especially
Cole
as
is,
their tour manager.
it's right. And you're supposed to be like the adult in the room. Like, and he is just like constantly pushing them to do crazier and crazier stuff. The red snapper is his idea. The Great Dane incident is his idea. Like
And a lot of the
it's
times, like, the band members aren't even necessarily present when this stuff is going on, so he's just fucking
right.
doing stuff.
He's taking advantage of like the privileges of being Led Zeppelin adjacent and just acting a complete fool. Like it's just like total, excess. But again, it's like not even with the decency of being the guy who wrote the music. He's just some fucking asshole along for the ride. So he was like he's interviewed a ton in Hammer of the Gods. Like it's almost another Richard Cole book because without Richard Cole, what you've got is a bunch of fucking boring people who don't like each other very much. Like if it wasn't for Richard Cole, the whole book would be Jimmy Page like getting sick and reading occult books, and Robert Plant like I don't know whatever the fuck Robert Plant does, going to India or whatever. John Paul
Trying to
Jones.
fit into his teeny tiny little shirt.
Yeah. John Paul Jones just like it's basically he's just a working man, and then John Bonham maybe occasionally going on benders, but even that there would be a lot less of that if Richard Cole wasn't there. So he's just like this agent of chaos. I don't have a lot of good things to say about him, as you could probably tell. I don't have a lot of good things to say about really anybody involved in this. Um, so we could go through a little bit and talk about Led Zeppelin, talk about some things that were interesting. I was into Led Zeppelin a lot in high school. They're kind of the band that I got into after I'd sort of exhausted myself on the Beatles, and they're the band that I associate a lot with like my interest. Like it feels weird and pretentious to say this because I'm not a musician, but in the times that I have played music, like I don't remember me and my friend Brian ever playing a lot of like Beatles songs, but we played a ton of Led Zeppelin songs. He played guitar. He was a good guitarist. I'm like an okay drummer. And we would play the Lemon song and we would play Living, Loving, Made and like mostly stuff from their first couple albums because it's easy because it's mostly just drums and guitar. So they're kind of like my garage band. And so I was into them, but I was never, and I was like familiar with their overall lore, but I'd never really, other than Stairway to Heaven, I'd never really read a book about them. So, this was kind of, it was interesting to see where they came from in many ways because it's not a very flattering portrait of them, even musically. So we all know now, this is not controversial, I think, at this point, that Led Zeppelin were huge rip-off artists, and they ripped off everybody, like most prominently black people, because they were able to get away with it more. But I mean, honestly, even like some stuff that I wasn't as familiar with is Dazed and Confused was totally lifted wholesale from a guy who opened for them. It was a kind of folk singer named Jake Holmes, and you can hear his version of Dazed and Confused. It's on Spotify. It's on streaming. You can hear it. it's the same fucking song except with different words. And when it came out on the album, he didn't even get a co-writing credit. Like they just flagrantly stole from people. And when I say they, I mostly Page, like like because again, he's the biggest piece of shit in the band. And you know, like he was in the Yardbirds with Jeff Beck. That's kind of like so the book starts with mostly Page and John Paul Jones, their careers in the 60s. They were both session players, and then Jimmy Page joined the Yardbirds. And for a while, him and Jeff Beck were both in the Yardbirds. And then Beck left, and Page kind of carried on, and like he was basically the only member from earlier. So he kind of like inherited their name. And I would imagine, I think there's a little bit of shadiness to that because, you know, shockingly, Jimmy Page is not a totally up and up person. So he ends up with the name The Yardbirds. And he also basically steals the arrangement for You Shook Me that the Jeff Beck group did, and their album came out. It's not that stealing from blues artists is any more okay. I think what makes it particularly egregious to me, though, is that like some of those old blues songs, you know, like Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You, there is an author to Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You. But even like on Joan Baez's album, it said traditional, you know, so like there's not as much culpability in Led Zeppelin stealing from like older blues music because it was more of a, everybody was making that mistake. But it's when they do stuff like taking the arrangement from Jeff Beck or taking Dazed and Confused from Jake Holmes that feels like really
and
malicious.
Steve Marriott, they were humble. I think it was Humble Pie, maybe it was Small Faces, but there were some like songs that they lifted from like Steve Marriott's career as well.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, they've been sued. The guys from Spirit just sued them for Stairway to Heaven. The suit wasn't successful. And I think in some ways that was not like, that didn't have as much credibility. But I mean, it's still like, not like they just got accused of plagiarism once or twice. It was pretty habitual for them. And it's just kind of fucked up that like they're making money hand over fist and they can't just give somebody like still record the song, do whatever you want with it, like give them a publishing credit. It's just smacks of just like miserliness that they're not even willing to, unless you actually threaten them with legal action. They're not even willing to, you know, give you some of the publishing. And the cherry on top of all this is that they are extremely vindictive about people stealing their shit. Like they will go out in the audience, they'll send Richard Cole and Peter Grant out into the audience to smash bootleggers' recording equipment because they have the audacity to be recording a Led Zeppelin performance. Long story short, Jimmy Page is a piece of shit. Like that, I feel like I'm going to say this a lot, but he just is, and I'm not afraid to say it because again, I could take him. Like I could have taken him even when he was young. Now that he's 80, I could absolutely mop the floor up with him. So Jimmy Page, if you're listening to this, fuck you. So that's the plagiarism thing. So another thing that was interesting about Hammer of the Gods is that I guess I obviously knew, but I think Stephen Davis kind of presents it in an artful way, is that there's basically Led Zeppelin is two kind of units melded into one. Half of it is Page and John Paul Jones, who are like these pro session musicians who had been around the block. They recorded a bunch of stuff like John Paul Jones did stuff with Donovan. There's a bunch of, aside from the Yardbirds, there's just a bunch of records that Page played on. I think he played on some Kinks singles and stuff like that. You know, they've been like professional musicians in England for most of the 60s. And then there's Plant and Bonham, who are like just a couple of like hillbilly yokels from Birmingham, basically. So there's these two sides of the band, and there's some tension between them. I thought it was interesting that for the first tour, the way Davis describes it is Jimmy Page was kind of ambivalent about even keeping he kind of had the attitude of this is my band, and I don't know if Robert Plant is going to be the singer. Like he was thinking about replacing Robert Plant, like up until the point that they recorded their second album, which seems, so crazy in retrospect, but it is this dynamic is interesting. And there's something about Led Zeppelin is like it's almost like they were manufactured. They didn't, it's not like these four guys met and became friends and decided to form a band. It's like Jimmy Page put together this band. He knew John Paul Jones from being around the London session scene. And then I think they find Bonham first.
In
And then they
Stairway to
find,
Heaven, it's actually different. It's like Jimmy Page and Robert Plant gel immediately, and they get John Paul Jones, I think, next, and then Robert Plant introduces John Bonham because they knew each other from like being in bands together. So
oh,
again, I don't know if that's true,
interesting.
but that's how it's told in Stairway to
Well,
Heaven.
the thing about Plant introducing Bonham, I knew it was one or the other. I couldn't. I think it. I think you're right. I think Plant did introduce Bonham because they were actually friends and they were in bands together. Yeah, but I mean, it's also like again, Richard Cole. Like, I don't believe anything he says.
Yeah,
So
because the way it's written in Stairway to Heaven is not as manufactured. It's like
yeah,
it is like the two professional musicians and the two kind of like more aspiring musicians, but they were like, I think right off the bat it's like they mentioned the thing where it's like, oh, if one of us leaves or dies, we're not continuing the band. That's
right,
obviously not the truth though. Like,
right. I
I
don't
mean,
think
it was
that's
with Bonham, I guess, but at that point they had like almost 10 years of
Yeah,
working together.
exactly. I don't think it was like that from the beginning. At least that's how Stephen Davis represents it. So I thought that was interesting that there's two very discrete, very distinct components of the band, and you can see that the way that they're portrayed. Like again, John Bonham just seems like somebody who needs to be he needs somebody to be like taking care of him. he's, he's like he can't be left to his own devices. But instead, I was just flipping through the book and I saw, not only do you have Richard Cole constantly pushing him to do more and more crazy things, but Jimmy Page. They were at some record company event, and Jimmy Page was the way he described it is he was like offended by the modern art that they had on display, and some of the paintings were still wet, and he like goaded Bonham into fucking up the paintings. It's like
Oh, was
there's
that they were at
constantly,
like some press thing and it was at a gallery?
yeah.
Yeah, that part pissed me off.
Yeah, especially yeah, as an artist, like
They're so dumb. And I'm not saying that all art is good, but I'm saying don't touch it regardless.
I'm
Like,
saying
what are
I
you
don't.
doing?
I would definitely say I don't trust Jimmy Page's opinion of modern art.
Right.
Like, certainly not to the extent that he feels justified in vandalizing it. They're just constantly like pushing John Bonham to do something crazy, and then he ends up dying, and everybody's all shocked. It's like, yeah, he's fucking crazy. Like, he should have been not riling him up and getting him to do more and more outrageous things. Like, I don't know. I'm not saying that it was anybody's fault that Bonham died, but Stephen Davis does a pretty good job of describing how him and Robert Plant were both a little bit like wide-eyed, by the whole fame at the beginning and sort of a little overwhelmed by it. And Page and Jones were the more like jaded professionals. So anyway, I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, especially since I mean you get a little bit of that in this, but it's not really analyzed, I guess. Like it may be
Right.
the same story, but it's not analyzed like it seems to be there. It was just kind of like, oh, they were dealt immediately and they were all friends and like you don't get the dynamics which I'm sure exist like they had to have existed.
Right. Another thing I thought was just interesting just in a broader sense. So like I watched the Apple Music documentary about 1971, and that's based on a book. I haven't read the book, but it's just talking about all of the different stuff that was happening in music in 1971. And I was like, there was a part of me that was always kind of waiting to see if they did anything because I was reading this book at the same time. So I was always like, oh, I wonder if they're going to do anything about Led Zeppelin, and they didn't. And I think, I don't know what is in the book. Like they probably, because I know Led Zeppelin is really protective of their intellectual property, and they just came out with a documentary. So I would imagine that there would have been an obstacle to using any footage or music in the show. So I don't know if the book includes them or not, but the show totally glosses over them and Black Sabbath and just anything like vaguely heavy metal related. They spend a lot of time on like T-Rex and Bowie and soul artists like Marvin Gaye. It feels like a much more 2021 version of what music was in 1971, and to the point that at the very end of the documentary, they are playing Changes by David Bowie, and it's showing like stuff from 1971, and then it's showing like all of this other artists down the line. It's like quickly cutting through them, and then it ends. This was actually like it struck me as kind of funny. It ends on a freeze frame of Billie Eilish, with the implication being that like everything in 1971 and the last 50 years of popular music were building up to Billie Eilish. Like it was a weird ending to the show.
No, I disagree.
But so I say this
so
because
why? Like, what is the deal with her? I know this is off topic, but what is the deal? Because she's just kind of like teeny bopper music for teenagers, and she is a whole teenager. How is anything that anyone was doing in 1971?
I know.
I mean, like, whatever. She's fine.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
I'm not the demographic, so I don't have anything to say to her. And she's like basically a teenager. Like, I don't want to be hating on teenagers.
Right.
No.
Yeah, it was an odd ending. But I say all this to put it in perspective, because when Stephen Davis is writing about the music scene in 1971, he makes a big point of saying that like the biggest band at that point, because this was like after the Beatles broke up and before Led Zeppelin got huge, the biggest band in like 1969, 70, 71 was fucking Iron Butterfly.
I thought that was funny too. Because you don't, like, in hindsight, you don't think about that.
Right. And we kind of talked about this when we talked about Mark Bolan. We talked about how like he would tour America, and American people, they wanted to hear Grand Funk Railroad, like big strapping guys with their shirts off.
Why wouldn't you?
Right. Yeah. I can tell you right now that Grand Funk Railroad and Iron Butterfly were not in the 1971 documentary, but they clearly should have been, because they were like the biggest bands at the time.
Right.
So I did think that was just interesting, and just
because even like 1971 was like, it was mainly 1972 that T-Rex was more famous.
Right. Yeah, like the whole,
and even then never in the
70s.
US.
And that was not true in the UK. So like that's why Led Zeppelin took off in the US, because Americans wanted to see like big, macho, sweaty, shirtless music, and that's what Led Zeppelin provided. Another thing, this is more shallow, and this is maybe something that like people who are hardcore fans of Led Zeppelin knew. I always pictured Robert Plant as being a small guy. I think because his shirts are so small. And I just figured nobody who shows that much midriff is, in excess of 6 feet. But apparently he's like huge. And they were talking, when they introduced him, they were like, some people thought he was the bouncer, and I was like, Robert Plant? Like, really?
Well, that's why the shirts look so teeny tiny. It's
They're
a
just
regular size
shirts. He actually couldn't find a shirt that would fit him.
Well, I think he probably took it from one of the teenagers he was fucking. It was like a size small, and he's 6'1".
Yeah. I knew that John Bonham was a big oaf because, like, obviously, but I didn't know Robert Plant was a big oaf.
I mean, they're all taller than me. John Bonham's only 5'10", actually.
Really?
Yeah.
I should guess what each of their heights are.
All right. Yeah, well, here's something funny. Okay, so Roger Daltrey, you know how, like, he's like my height.
Right.
How tall do you think Brian Johnson of AC/DC is?
Like 4'11", I think.
Okay, he's 5'5"
without the cap.
So yeah, I know. So he's 5'5", which means I'm slightly taller than Brian Johnson. don't know why it's so funny to me. John Paul Jones is 5'8", so every member of Led Zeppelin is taller than me, just by a little bit. Which I mean that makes sense.
How tall was Jimmy Page? Because
he was 5'11".
Okay, wow, that's skinny. Taller than I expected. I just picture him as like a skinny, frail.
Yeah, well, he's
like the way they describe him.
Well, he is skinny and frail. He's just built like one of those like used car windsock things.
Oh, one other thing is, I have some criticisms about Stephen Davis. So far, I've gone pretty easy on him because, compared to Richard Cole, he's like fucking, the best writer of all time. But I do have some criticisms. There's a lot of like unsupported claims that he makes. One thing that comes up a lot early on, he talks about there having hippie ideals and doesn't examine it. And it's like, well, as far as I can tell, Led Zeppelin was like the antithesis of hippie ideals. They had a manager that would come in and strong arm people. Like this was a time when it was considered like uncouth to want to be paid for your concert. Everything was supposed to be free, and like, music is free, and the people give it to the people, and everything else, you're a capitalist pig. And they're like
almost the first corporate rock band.
Right. They were, they're like Peter Grant.
That
was a thug.
That was like a lot of the criticism that rock critics at the time had for them, is that they were too corporate. Right. Yeah, exactly. Just because you can like rent out, how is it pronounced? The Welsh place? Is it Bronyar?
Oh, Bronar or Bronrar or whatever. Yeah, I don't know how to say it actually in Welsh.
I've only seen it written. Yeah, just because you can have your rich manager rent that place out for you to, so you can afford to go out into nature and write fucking Houses of the Holy. That doesn't make you a hippie. Because you're writing about Tolkien stuff.
Right. If anybody, Robert Plant has a little bit of that. So I kind of get what he's going for, but like hippie, I don't know if I would say hippie ideals. If anything, they were pretty much the antithesis of like ideals. That was not them.
Yeah, like maybe hippie aesthetic.
Any kind of ideals. Yeah, aesthetic would be a better choice of words.
They're like the Urban Outfitters of rock bands.
Right. Yeah, they had long hair and they sang about Tolkien.
Yeah, teeny tiny little shirts.
Sure. Teeny tiny shirts, yeah. There's also an interesting, it's funny you mentioned fan fiction. Sometimes the way that Stephen Davis describes Page and Plant, especially, there's like a sexual charge to it. It's kind of funny, and it's especially funny because sometimes Stephen Davis doesn't really seem to like Led Zeppelin all that much. I think that's one of the reasons why I came out of this book just with a bad taste in my mouth about them, because he's not very enamored with them as people. And a lot of the time, he'll be talking about albums that are like pretty canonical now, like Led Zeppelin 3, and he'll say like, oh yeah, Celebration Day, it was he said it's like a bold-faced ripoff of Crosby, Stills and Nash and Tony Visconti's string arrangements for T-Rex. He does not go easy on them, but sometimes he'll be talking about Page and Plant on stage, and it'll be like, do you want to fuck both Jimmy Page and Robert Plant? They're just very sexually charged. Is there anything you want to bring up, or do you want to start talking about the sex crimes now? Because I've got some thoughts about the sex crimes.
We can do that. I just have some thoughts overall about how they conducted themselves even outside of sexually.
Not even sexually, or criminally.
Yeah, just like I got to a point when I was reading where I'm like, every single chapter, they just will like cause pandemonium everywhere they go. And then there was one instance where like they caused all this problems on the train. There was like a couple things on the train, because there was a time that John Bonham shat in Jimmy Page's girlfriend's purse. I think that was when they were in Tokyo.
The purse shitting incident, yeah.
Yeah, you know it. And then there was another time where they were on the train and like something happened and they were just acting crazy, and then like somehow they got Peter Grant enraged and he was yelling at them or something. And it's like this whole thing where they like scared all these people on this train, because if you're on the train and there are all these grown men like yelling at each other and acting crazy, obviously you're going to be a little bit terrified. And then like they ended up just like apologizing to each other. It's like, apologize to the people on the train. And then there was this other thing that happened where they were at a hotel. The picture that Richard paints in this book is just a hellscape where Led Zeppelin, they take over everything. Like, you can't escape from them. There's this one part on page 177 in Stairway to Heaven where they were like booked at a hotel, and they come back to the hotel late at night, probably after like drinking, and they go into their what they thought was their room, but it ends up being someone else's room. And so the couple that are in there in bed are obviously like scared and are like, "What are you doing in here?" And so then they like yell at he asks like, "What the hell are you doing in my room?" And so Peter is like, "I was about to ask you the same fucking question," which is such a weird. Like, why not just be like, something weird's going on here? So then it was him and Peter, Richard and Peter, and they go back down to the desk to like ask the receptionist about it, but there's another Led Zeppelin staff working at the desk. Because allegedly the hotel staff was like, "Oh, I need to step out for a second. Oh, here's what it is. I bribed the desk clerk into going into the kitchen and fetching some food for us." So,
oh my God.
So they bribed this hotel worker to do a chore for them. And in the meantime, he took over the desk. So Peter and Cole come down. Like, it's like the hotel got overtaken with Led Zeppelin's crew. And these poor people end up leaving because they got the guy on their crew to call up to their room and be like, "You need to get out of the hotel." So they checked out and left. It's like, it's Led Zeppelin's world, and we all just have to like cower in it. It's just, it sounds horrible.
Yeah, they're the worst. Imagine being like just somebody who was just there, like an innocent bystander. Like I feel like we said something similar when we were talking about Motley Crue running amok in Japan. Like, imagine being on that train where Nikki Sixx beaned the guy with the bottle.
It would be it would honestly be terrifying, because
be the worst day of my life.
Men are already men are already
like
so scary.
If you witnessed a bank robbery or something.
Right, like men are already so scary. I don't think men realize how like scary and domineering their presence are, their voices are. So like, I'm just thinking, like, hotel rooms aside, because that would be fucking terrifying if I'm in the hotel room and Peter Grant and Richard Cole, have you seen them? They are like orcs. Talk about Tolkien-esque. These are like inhuman looking, freakishly large men, and they just pop in your, like, that is literally my worst nightmare. Like, that is my worst nightmare. But like, that aside, if you're on the train and they're just like causing a disruption, I would be terrified. And their reaction is always like, "Oh, can't these people take a joke? Oh, they no." And they're big dudes. Like, we just read off their heights.
Yeah,
the shortest one is at least like 3 inches taller than me.
And the shortest one is also the least aggressive one. He's probably not even there for any of this. So. The last general observation I'll make is there's a recurring theme, I imagine, in both books, but it's definitely in Hammer of the Gods. There's a recurring theme of them hating whenever their wives are around. Like, there's one early tour in like 69 or 70 where their wives came along and they were like, "Well, we're never fucking doing that again."
Yeah, yeah.
It's always like, yeah, every time they're home in England, they're like, can't wait to get away from their wives, and then they'll go crazy in America, and they'll like not tell their wives what happened. And it's just like, I don't know. It's just, I like to just remind myself how old they are at any given moment. And it gets increasingly pathetic by the end of it, because they're like, pushing, like, they're in their 30s by the end of it, and they're still acting like this.
I mean, like, Jimmy Page was like 28 when he was dating Lori Maddox, so he was
right.
A full 14 years older than her.
A grown man. Yeah. Let's talk about the various sex crimes now. I feel like the whole discourse around cancel culture has made it really difficult to talk about this stuff because it becomes like so black and white, and it becomes like you bring up anything that you're like, hey, that was kind of fucked up, and people are like, oh, you want to cancel Led Zeppelin? Like you're not going to listen to Led Zeppelin anymore, you're going to cancel them. And it's like, I don't fucking like. First of all, they're not fucking canceled. Like Jimmy Page has more money than I'm ever gonna have in my life. We're talking about them now. We just read two fucking books about them. Like I cancel culture isn't real. Like that's number one. But number two is like, no, I'm not like, it's not even about that for me. It's not like, oh, well, now we have to. I respect anybody's decision to, hear these facts about Led Zeppelin and be like, I don't care to support that. Like that's fine. It's not a decision that I've made. Clearly, I'm sitting here talking about them. But it's like it's like people who don't want to listen to Phil Spector anymore. Like I get it. He literally shot and killed a woman. Like I just hate even like wading into these waters because everything it's also like polarized and it's like you're expected to. But
Well, it's the
I
same
think
thing when like immediately when Bowie died, and he also had a relationship with Laurie Maddox, and everyone was like, "Oh, well, Bowie was a statutory rapist and all this stuff," which is like,
right,
yeah, I mean, that is true. Like,
right,
I'm not gonna deny that, but
right.
it was the cult like this. I hate to even say this, but it was the culture in the '70s for rock stars to be having sex with teenage groupies. That was the culture. It's wrong,
Yeah. Yeah,
but
if
like.
if Led Zeppelin and David Bowie are canceled, then we're gonna have to cancel everybody, like all of them. And that's why nobody's actually talking about canceling because it was the whole like I think my big takeaway from this is that the like all of rock and roll was a fucking cesspool. And like it's
The
good
music
that it's
business
not
is
like that
really just
anymore.
rape culture, like,
Right, right. Yeah, exactly.
and to a
It's
certain
just
extent, it's still like I don't actually know enough about it anymore, but I'm sure it still is. Like,
it is. Yeah, you're right. As soon as I said it's not like that anymore, that's actually not true because every other week there's like, I mean, like look at Marilyn Manson right now is, that's like the biggest story. And then lots of other less famous musicians have been accused of grooming minors. And it's still very much part of the culture. I guess the difference now is that there actually can be some consequences to your career.
well, yeah, well,
Whereas,
before I think like the difference was it was just more accepted. Not that that should have been the case, but like people weren't even thinking about it the same way.
right,
So it
right.
wasn't even like, oh, they're not being held accountable. It was like no one was even thinking about that. In hindsight, obviously, and I'm sure there were some people like contemporary to the time who didn't think it was okay for grown ass men to be having sex with teenagers. But it didn't seem like it
I'm
was in
sure
the
these
public
girls'
discourse.
parents had some opinions
Yeah.
about it. Yeah, so I mean, I think I want to talk about Laurie Maddox in a minute because I have some thoughts about that. But first, I want to talk about this story from Ellen Sander from Life magazine, which is in both of the books. This to me was the most fucked up part of the book because it's like there's no good there's no rationalization for this. Like you mentioned that like the red snapper incident and the Great Dane incident and all that stuff. It's always like, oh, she was game and she was into it. And like you said, it's ultimately Richard Cole's word versus, some teenage girl whose name we don't even know. So like we have to kind of take that whole issue of consent with a grain of salt anyway. But like, even if that's true, even if it was, even if this girl like showed up at their door and was like, I want a dog to eat me out, like, if you don't put peanut butter on my vagina, somebody else will. Like, even in that fantasy world, this story does not have that any kind of justification. So this journalist from Life magazine, Ellen Sander, she does one of their first, like, keep in mind this is like their first major press. Like this is their first time in the US. They are not superstars Led Zeppelin. Like this is a huge opportunity. I feel like most bands would be like, let's be on our best behavior because this could really make or break us. So she travels with them and goes on tour with them and is writing about it. It's basically it's like Almost Famous, but instead of a teenage Cameron Crowe, it's a grown woman. So it says on the last night, Ellen Sander from Life showed up backstage. This is on page 87 of my copy. Showed up backstage to thank the band for letting her travel with them and to say goodbye. She walked into Led Zeppelin's dressing room. She remembers, unprepared for what would happen next. Two members of the group attacked me, shrieking and grabbing at my clothes, totally over the edge. Bonzo came at me first, and then there were a couple more. After that, I didn't see much. All of a sudden, there were all these hands on me, and all these big guys. My clothes were half torn off. They were in a frenzy. I was absolutely terrified that I was going to be raped and really angry. And then I saw Peter Grant, who was bigger than all of them, and I thought, him too? Oh no, I'm going to be killed. But what he did was pull Bonham off me. Peter Grant just picked him up and pulled him off me, so all they did was tear my clothes. They didn't hurt me except for my feelings. So that's kind of the end of the. Like, she refuses to write their story. Later on, she publishes a book that uses her like journalism from that, and in her book she says if you walk inside the cages of the zoo, you get to see the animals close up, stroke the captive pelts, and mingle with the energy behind the mystique. You also get to smell the shit firsthand. So that was her experience of Led Zeppelin. And I like
it was more literal than she thought it was.
right.
You could actually smell the shit if you hang out because they probably shat in your shoes or purse.
Yeah. That's honestly that's one of the most harrowing passages I've ever read in any of these books. And there's a lot of these books have like rock stars behaving badly. There was of course the famous example of In the Dirt of that would by modern day standards would be considered rape when they were having sex with a girl, and I think Vince and well, I don't remember which ones. Two of those.
I think it was Nikki and Vince, or Nikki and Tommy.
Nikki and Tommy. Yeah, I don't. Two of those knuckleheads. I just know it wasn't Mick Mars. That's.
Yeah.
I know it wasn't him. We could at least confidently rule him out. But they switched partners without her consent.
Well, they admit themselves that that's rape. That's one thing.
Right.
One thing about The Dirt that's different from this, and granted that was like each member's input rather than just like some chucklefuck writing about them.
Right.
Is that they were more like honest about stuff. Like they said, like, yeah, we raped this girl.
Yeah, they did actually.
I would rather hear that than Bonzo saying, I mean, granted this is filtered through Richard Cole again, but he says, what a bunch of crap, Bonzo told me later. We may have been teasing her a little, maybe our drunkenness offended her, but if she thought we were trying to rape her, then she's got a wilder imagination than most writers. And, I mean, and this is kind of what I was saying, that, like, I don't think men realize how terrifying they are, especially when you're a small woman and there's a bunch of them tearing at your clothes, like, why wouldn't she think that she was about to be raped? Like, what about any of that would make her believe that she was not about to be gang raped?
Yeah, when it's described from her perspective, it's like disturbing.
It's actually like terrifying.
Yeah, it's a rough read.
Like even if, which I don't believe, like I think they were gonna gang rape her, but even if they did not have that intention at all, or they didn't have the intention even to like intimidate her, which I don't know how that could not be the case. Right. Just by doing that, it's still scary.
Right.
So it's like, regardless of your intention, you shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah. So it's like that to me, and that's kind of the thing. Like when you talk about cancel culture, like I said, Led Zeppelin has not been canceled. They're still all over classic rock radio. They're still, like we still listen to them. I never stopped listening to Led Zeppelin. I'm never going to stop listening to Led Zeppelin. So like cancel culture is such it's like a distraction strategy. Because I think what the real issue is that like they never had to face any kind of accountability for this. Like they just spent an entire decade of their lives terrorizing people. Especially women, and then they were kind of able to just be like, well, I got that out of my system, now I can just settle into being a respected elder statesman. Like the worst that they ever had to experience was the minor embarrassment of having a book like Hammer of the Gods written about them. And the way Jimmy Page talks about it, it's like he was sexually assaulted. Like they're just a bunch of bitches. So that's what I have to say about whether Led Zeppelin should be canceled. But I want to talk about Laurie Maddox too, because that's the most famous story. That's the one that I think there has gotten a little bit of momentum, on social media. Like every once in a while you see like people be like, "Did you know that Jimmy Page kidnapped a teenager so he could
Yeah.
have sex with her?" And like people are like, "Wow, that's fucked up," because it is. Even by the standards of the time, like the fact that he felt the need to like keep her under lock and key because he knew that he would be in trouble with the law, if it got out that he was with this girl. It's not a great look. It's undeniably fucked up. I do think I want to like make room for Laurie Maddox's agency. Also, I think she has a kind of like nuanced view of what this was, although she has
Yeah.
in recent
I mean, she
years.
was also 14 at the time,
Right,
so it's like I don't want to be like, oh, she was interested,
right,
because you're
exactly.
14. So like,
Yeah,
either way, it's not okay, and it's the responsibility of whatever grown ass rock star was having sex with her to like not have sex with her.
right. And I think
But that being said, like how I don't want to like however she views that. I don't want to say like this was wrong.
right. And I think
I don't know what.
even she has said that, like I'm reading from Wikipedia right now. It says, when asked whether the Me Too movement had changed her opinion on her group of years, she admitted she had not seen her relationships as exploitative at the time, but that the movement had forced her to view these years in a different light. And that now, this is a quote from her: "I don't think underage girls should sleep with guys. I wouldn't want this for anybody's daughter. My perspective is changing as I get older and more cynical." So, there's like this is a place where I think there is some level of nuance. I mean, like you said, Jimmy Page should have kept his dick in his pants as a 28-year-old. He should just know.
But also I can say that if I was 14 in 1970, I would probably have sex with David Bowie or want to have sex with David Bowie.
Right,
That's not
yeah.
right.
Right,
Like
right,
I totally understand that that's wrong. But
right.
as a 14-year-old, like I can see how that would
And
happen.
that's
I don't
why
see
and
Jimmy
that's
Page
why
as
the
much,
the
but
onus should be on the man to like not the older man to not engage, because yeah, of course these
right.
14-year-olds wanted to have sex. I mean, Jimmy Page is kind of an acquired taste, but a lot of women were and girls were super into him. So, if you're into that like consumptive nerd feel, then
Well, lucky
he's the
you, he's
Timothy
also a
Chalamet of
fucking
his day.
creep.
Yeah, right. uh, and I also think that talking about it in terms of like, oh, Jimmy Page is problematic or whatever, that covers up the fact that there's a whole like cottage industry about like procuring girls for all kinds of rock stars, Mick Jagger, David Bowie,
Right.
all those
Yeah, and
fuckers.
that's what I was trying to get, that was the culture. I wasn't saying like, oh, it was the 70s. It was
Right.
different back then. I mean, it was in many ways, but
Yeah.
I'm not
Well,
saying
it
that's
was different
okay.
because
But the
nobody got
culture
mad.
around, yeah, and the culture around being a rock star was literally that like you would have teenage girls funneled up into your room.
Right. And Rodney's English Disco was run by Rodney Bingenheimer, who was a fucking creep, who like, raped one of the runaways. So like, the whole culture was sick. I do think Jimmy Page is a piece of shit. But I'm not saying that he was like uniquely shitty, at least in this regard. What really struck me about it this time, because I always thought it was fucked up that he was like pursuing younger girls. But what struck me this time was there's a moment where Jimmy Page like moves on from, they were in a relationship on and off, like obviously not an exclusive relationship because Led Zeppelin can't, cross the room without sticking their penis into some kind of orifice. So like there's, obviously they're not monogamous, but like, he would go to LA and every time he would go to LA, Laurie Maddox was there for like several years. So finally, like 74-ish, he moves on, and now he's with BB Buell. And this is an interview with this is a quote from the book. It's on the bottom of page 224 of my copy. And I'm like crushed, Lori remembers. It was just awful. She ran out. A few hours later, she waded through the crowd of doors, camped outside Jimmy's suite, and knocked on the door. BB opened the door with the chain on to see who was there, and Lori attacked her, grabbing BB by the hair and trying to drag her out of the room. Encouraged by the corridor girls who hated BB Buell as a rival interloper from back east. Sitting calmly in his suite, watching as two of his girlfriends tried to tear each other's hair out, Jimmy was amused. Later, he told friends that the whole thing was incredible, hilarious. So, like, what really struck me about this was, like, you could really see how immature Lori Maddox was. So she was born in 58. So that would mean
so she's our mom's age.
Yeah. In 74, that would mean she was like 16. And she is behaving like a jilted 16-year-old, like she's like everything's so dramatic. She's attacking her. Later on, it's like she's like, out in the middle of the street crying and yelling. And I'm just like, why would you even want that in your, like, leaving aside the whole issue of legality and morality and all of that, like, what the fuck is wrong with you as an almost 30-year-old man that you want this like middle school level relationship? It was just like, it's so, I was reading it and I was like, well, yes, of course this is what happens when you date literal teenagers. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah. Yeah. And like, what do you have in common?
Right. Exactly. I mean, you both like Led Zeppelin. I guess that's not the basis for I would say even a healthy sexual relationship. Those are my thoughts on the sex crimes. You did mention that I thought you said something interesting before we started recording, that there's a lot of there's a lot of non-consensual stuff going on even between the band members and their crew, which also fall under the category of sex crimes.
Yeah, so actually, let's talk specifically about consent and the way it's depicted in this book, because there's no consent ever. No one consents to anything, but like it's written as if it's consensual.
Right.
Like there's one situation where these two girls show up to their hotel room, but it's Richard Cole and it's probably Jimmy Page. Let me see who it is. Okay, no, it was John Bonham and Richard Cole. And these two girls come to their hotel room, but they need to like leave out for something. I think they're going to do the show, so they come before the show, and they're like, "We have to go do this show, but we'll be back." They handcuff them to the bed, but they're like, "Okay, there's a joint and a sandwich here," or no, it's like there's a joint and we'll have room service come up with food for you. But then they're gone. Like, their concerts are like 5 fucking hours. So they just leave for hours and hours with these women handcuffed to the bed. And then it's written as if they like enjoyed this and they were like, oh, they were there when we got back. I don't know that I believe that.
I can't imagine. Also
like, how did they even eat or smoke a joint if they're handcuffed to the bed? So yeah, that was one of my notes, is just like, I don't believe that these girls were handcuffed for hours by two grown men and had absolutely zero complaints, especially when they were sent food that they could not eat because their hands were like
that makes it worse.
Out of commission. Right.
It's like torture.
And then the crew member, I think they were working on an album and they bugged a crew member's room while he was having sex with his girlfriend and then put it on speakers throughout the house so that everyone else could hear it. And then, like, just kept making snide comments to him about it.
Yeah.
It's just like...
I feel like the novelty of that would rub off really quickly, I think.
I think it would rub off almost immediately. It just sounds
almost
like...
immediately.
It just, like, that's the thing is, like, how long was it going on? Because so everybody else in the house, what... And that's another thing about consent, like, okay... I think it was John Bonham who did this.
Right.
I'm sure Richard Cole had a part in this too, but it's like, so you're assuming everybody else just wants to sit around and listen to this man have sex, and then it's also like non-consensual to the crew member and his girlfriend who had to be recorded.
Right. I think Led Zeppelin needed an HR department. I think is like the big takeaway from this book, because Richard Cole was not fulfilling that duty. They also, something we talked about before we started recording, they also needed an accountant, because you touched upon this earlier. There's a big episode late in both books where they get robbed. Where are they, at the Fillmore, or I mean, it doesn't matter.
It's like, it's the last show of their tour. I don't remember where they're at.
Right.
But they're in, they get the money stolen from a safe deposit box in the hotel. And they suspect it's Richard Cole because he's the only one with the fucking key.
I still suspect it's Richard Cole.
I mean, come on. Who else could it be? I don't think they ever find out, right?
Yeah, I don't think so. It's like a fucking unsolved mystery, unless you go with the obvious conclusion that it was fucking Richard Cole.
Yeah, right. yeah. And then like they have to call the police, and then the police call the FBI, and so then like Richard Cole's first concern is to hide all the drugs that they have. I think that some of those drugs is where the 200,000 went. And then it's also like he obviously can't keep track of the money, because there's one part where he's being grilled by the cops, and he's like, the band knew I wouldn't try to fuck them over. I had managed their money on the road, and the book's always balanced. At least they did eventually. Occasionally, my calculations would come up a few $100s short, and I'd ask the band for some help remembering how the money was spent. That is not... that does not make me confident in Richard Cole's accounting skills.
Imagine if your accountant was like, hey, can you remember?
Right. And it's always like, Bonham said that you gave me $300 to drinks, for drinks in the bar 2 nights ago, or Jimmy might remind me, don't forget about the $200 I spent on that hooker. Everything balanced out. There was never any dishonesty. Except for when $200,000
right,
mysteriously went missing, yeah. And I was the only one with the key.
Yeah, I really want to see. I think the most interesting Led Zeppelin book would be their financial records. I wish they would release that.
Right. Yeah,
what were their line items for hookers and
hookers, transvestites, gay bars,
right?
Buying out the entire bar. There's a lot of them buying out whole bars and just like drinking everything. And I don't know if this is true, but they would drink like all of the liquor in a bar, or that a hotel had available, or like wherever they were at, they would like drink everything. And I'm like, I don't know if this is hyperbole or... Yeah,
it's all kind of like, by the end of both of these books, you're kind of like, was it worth it? Because again, Led Zeppelin, I love a lot of Led Zeppelin albums. I really, most of their albums are great, and they hold up, but it's like, was this worth it? Like,
I don't think this was necessary.
Yeah.
None of this stuff was necessary, because their music doesn't even reflect any of
right.
it. Except for like the one song that's about like teenage groupies
right.
in LA. But like what part of like, I don't know, Tangerine says anything about like any of this debauchery?
Yeah. One of the things, I feel like Hammer of the Gods is kind of most famous for, it's a big source of the whole like, spooky kind of stuff about the band. Like, it makes a lot of hay out of the like purported rumors that they sold their souls. My favorite part of the rumor is that everybody sold their souls except John Paul Jones. He refused to sell his soul to the devil. I don't know how that works. I feel like if I were the devil, I would be like, no, it's all of you or nothing. Like, I'm not going to make you guys famous and not take his.
Yeah, because then he's just riding the coattails.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, what the fuck? Like, so we're to believe that John Paul Jones is the only person ever to outsmart the Prince of Lies.
Satan's like, okay, I'll take
and Charlie Daniels.
I'll take the drunk bear, the guy in the teeny tiny shirt, the windsock, and I'm not gonna touch the Prince Valiant motherfucker, though. He can.
So they talk a lot about that and like the Led Zeppelin curse and stuff, and all that stuff is
The Led
bullshit.
Zeppelin curse was the curse that they had on these service workers and,
Right.
and women.
Yeah, exactly. There's a scourge
Imagine
to
going into
regular
a
people.
hotel room and they've stacked up fish that they've been fishing out of the river, and you have to clean that shit up. That's the Led Zeppelin curse.
Right. Yeah.
There's
and I
actually,
mean,
I actually have a passage from that because they did something in a hotel room, and obviously the hotel staff is upset about this because
right, as well they should
the
be.
cleaning woman came in and she opened the closet door and a quote tidal wave of sharks collapsed on top of her, knocking her to the floor and sending her scrambling for her life. Perhaps she thought that she had been attacked by alien monsters. No, she probably just opened the closet and was like bombarded with fish.
A bunch of fucking sticky fish. Like I don't even think it
Like
has to be
old.
aliens.
They'd been in there like with no ice or anything for like hours. It doesn't have to be aliens. And then in my notes I wrote, why is he roasting these hotel staff members? Because this is the next paragraph. A few minutes later, the hotel manager rushed into the room to inspect the damage. As he surveyed the carnage, he placed the palm of his hands on his balding head, apparently as a way of displaying his disgust. If he had had any hair, he probably would have pulled it out one clump at a time. He just called this man bald for no reason.
Yeah, it really is like you come away from this just hating them. You're just like,
Oh, I hate them. I fucking
who
hate. There was
fucking gave you the right to act like this?
There was one instance where they like rent cars. They rent these Volkswagen. First of all, this was another thing where they like had stuff to do. They were in Reykjavik, Iceland, which is another place I want to go.
It's a beautiful city. I've been there. It's amazing.
Yeah, and I wanted to go, and I again have not been able to go. And they're in fucking Reykjavik, and they're just like, oh,
They get bored.
I'm bored. So they go and rent these cars so that they can drive around. And then doing that, they get bored from that. And so they heard something that said that the cars could float or something. I don't know where the fuck they heard that. And so John Bonham and John Paul Jones are in this car, and Bonham wants to drive it into the water. And so they do. And then at first they're like, oh, it's not sinking. But then it starts sinking because it's a car in water. So it's like they waited a couple seconds and were like, oh, it's floating. And then, like, of course it's not floating. It says the water line reached above the door's seals. The water began seeping into the car's interior. I suddenly got scared and felt this terrible chill running down my spine. I could envision a newspaper headline blaring, rock musicians drown while tour manager looks on. Yeah, no shit. That should have been the name of the book.
Yeah.
Shit, we better get these guys out of there. And that at that point in my notes, I wrote, yeah, no shit. You should. Like, why did you even, like, condone this happening? The two of us frantically began to wade into the bitterly cold water. When we reached the car, the lake was still shallow enough for us to stand. And basically they end up somehow getting the car back to shore, and no one dies, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your opinion. And then John Paul Jones is all upset, and it turns out this is just a stupid Coleism, because I don't even know that this happened, but I guess John Paul Jones wasn't afraid of dying in the car. He was upset because he had some weed in his socks that he had stuffed in, and his weed got wet. And that's the story. I fucking hate them.
Yeah, they're really the worst. That's my takeaway. And I was like, again, part of me, I'm interested a little bit. There's a new book that just came out. It's called Led Zeppelin: The Biography. And on the one hand, I'm sort of like, do I want to try reading this and like to test out my theory? Like, is it that I hate Led Zeppelin, or is it that I hate the picture of Led Zeppelin that Stephen Davis and Richard Cole painted? Because sometimes biographies can come out and like you have a totally different view of the people. But I will tell you, I'm not gonna, if I ever do read it, it's not gonna be for a long ass time, because I am so tired of these idiots. Like I've been spending, I spent like a really sustained concentrated period with them in December, and then they've kind of been lingering in my mind since then. And then we've been talking to them, and I'm like, I've had it up to here with these fuckers. Like, which is I imagine is how everybody felt about them, except apparently honestly the biggest shock of this whole thing is how Richard Cole kept his job for the entire duration.
He didn't even do his
band.
job. A lot of the like his complaints with Robert Plant are Robert Plant like asking him to do stuff that a tour manager should do, and him being like, "What a pompous asshole!
Yeah.
You're the tour manager."
Right. Yeah, they're all the worst. And this is like a classic. I've never had such a distinct separation between the music that I love and the horrible people making it as I have reading this book. Because Kiss, even though I like their music is also kind of horrible. Like it's part and parcel of the horrible people making it. I still enjoy it, but it's not like we're like Led Zeppelin is very much like if I could just remove the people behind it from the equation, it would be so much better. Like, I wish I never knew anything about them.
Yeah, that's the thing is like I got this book because my friend Andy had it. And she said it was funny, and at the time I was in 9th grade, and I was really into Led Zeppelin, so I got it. I didn't know anything about them. I knew a little bit about Jimmy Page and Laurie Maddox and stuff, but that,
Right.
like, to me, is the stuff that I knew was just, like, standard 70s rock star stuff.
Right,
And then
right.
I read this, and it's like they're shitting in shoes and, like, driving cars into water, and I'm just like, this is not what I signed up for at all. But it's also, like, the first time I read it, I was like, this is hilarious.
Right.
This time, I don't know if it's because I'm an adult or just because I'm, like, bitter that they got to travel or, like, because I'm like, their age at the time. Like,
Yeah,
I'm
we're both
30 now, so...
Yeah, we're both older than they are for a lot of this book. And so,
Right,
this whole time, you're like, what the fuck? Like,
And even when I was their age, I wasn't like that. So it's
Yeah.
just like, what is
Right.
wrong with y'all? This is one thing I read today that made me just, like, hate everyone. It's when they're filming Song Remains the Same, and they're filming the live footage at Madison Square Garden.
Yeah.
And Richard Cole, filmmaking expert, has something to say about the way the filming is going. From the beginning, the band sometimes had the feeling that the crew, that's the film crew, not only didn't know what they were doing, but they were also becoming a real imposition. Some crew members would often bark questionable orders and instructions. So here's the questionable instruction. "This is very important," Massett once said. "We need everyone in the band to wear the same clothes for all 3 shows at Madison Square Garden. If your clothes change, there won't be any continuity in the movie." Robert thought he was kidding. "Is he a filmmaker or a fashion consultant?" he asked me. Are you fucking kidding me? So you want them to film multiple days of the concert and then splice it together. One day Robert got a teeny tiny little shirt, and the next day he got another teeny tiny little shirt. And like, it's so obvious what the purpose of this would be, and they're actually
Right.
like, how dare he tell Led Zeppelin what to
Right.
wear?
What does
Like,
he know? That is pretty much, yeah, that's like the presiding theme of Led Zeppelin is they don't know what they're talking about. The critics,
Yeah, that's the thing,
critics
it's
are full of shit. The filmmakers are full of shit. Everybody's full of shit. Like,
That's the sentiment, is that it's not even like, I'm Led Zeppelin, I can do what I want. It's literally like, I'm Led Zeppelin, I can do what I want, and they're dumb and don't know what they're talking about.
Right.
Even though these are very, like, clear instructions that make sense if you know anything about what... Like, I've never made a film before, and I know
Or
that
even
if
if
you're
you just
filming multiple
understand
nights
logic.
of a concert, you should probably wear the same damn thing, so that if
Yeah.
they use different footage for different parts, they will have some kind of continuity.
Right. Yeah, it's not even that you have to have filmmaking experience. You literally just need to understand that film is shots being cut together from different sources. It's like you need to know what a film is.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Led Zeppelin are garbage. I feel like I've said my piece on them. Is there anything else that you wanted to to make sure we talk
No,
about?
I don't think so. No, I'll go over my notes one more time, but I feel like there were just a lot of little things. A lot of my observations were just like, why does Richard know this? He
Right.
has like in one of the original chapters, he has some quote, like direct quote from Robert Plant's father
Right.
that Robert Plant
Before
would have
he
said to
had
Robert Plant before Richard Colt ever like knew Robert
yeah.
Plant. I'm like, how does he know he said that? There's one situation I think where he like hands Robert Plant's dad a full bottle of beer or something,
Oh
and
yeah, he won't drink out of
he's
it because he's
yeah, he's like
too posh.
offended, and yeah, and Richard is like, well, that's weird. It's like, why would you just hand someone a full bottle of? It's too much, and a lot of it obviously is marking on the consent or lack thereof.
Right.
Oh, I have one more thing to say. There's a picture of Richard Cole with Crazy
Oh
Town in this
yeah,
book.
that is important. It's important to know that he went on to even greater things by being the tour manager for Crazy Town. So that's Led Zeppelin. We now hate Led Zeppelin. Actually, that's not true. I've been listening to a lot of Zeppelin lately. Their music totally holds up. They're as human beings, just pretty much complete irredeemable garbage. Uh, so. I don't know if next month is an improvement or not, but next month we're reading Sebastian Bach. We're reading his autobiography,
I
18
think
in Life on
I
Skid
think
Row.
Sebastian Bach has some level of self awareness.
I think
So
Sebastian Bach has at least he has improved with time. We recently we started a Headbangers Book Club Twitter, and I follow like a bunch of old rock stars, and Sebastian Bach is one of them. And he gets in a lot of fights on Twitter with like people who are against the COVID vaccine, and you know, like he gets in he gets in a lot of petty arguments, but they're usually with the right people. And so you know, I'm not mad at Sebastian Bach. He's disavowed, you know, that shitty AIDS kills fags shirt that he used to wear. You know, he's grown as a man. So I don't think I'll come away from Sebastian Bach's book hating his guts to the degree that I did Jimmy Page. I will say next time is going to be we're going to do a little bit of a different format. We're splitting up the book so that we don't have these just like long 2 hours of like cramming everything we can possibly talk about in. So we're hoping for like shorter, more manageable episodes. And then we're also hoping for like audience participation. So you can read along with us. March 11th, we'll have the first half of the book read. And then by the end of the month, so by the 31st, we'll have the second episode. So read along with us, and you can post a comment on YouTube. You can send us a message on Twitter. We're at Headbangers BC. We're also that on Instagram at Headbangers BC, so you can post something there. You can also email us. We have an email address. I genuinely don't expect anyone to use it, but it does exist. It's headbangers, all one word, at dystopiandanceparty.com. Let us know, first of all, if you've read Hammer of the Gods and or Stairway of Heaven. Share your thoughts. We
to
might read
heaven.
Stairway to Heaven. I am a real Led Zeppelin fan for sure. I'm a hardcore fan.
Well,
Uh,
Carousel Lumber is the best Led Zeppelin song.
Actually, funnily enough, Stephen Davis makes a nuclear hot take in his book that In Through the Outdoor was their best album. I was like, what?
I
I mean, I
won't.
like it.
I really like In Through the
Yeah,
Outdoor. I won't say that it's my like their best album, but it is one of my favorites.
yeah. I mean, I was actually I
I
was into
really
it.
like. I was joking about Carousel Lumber because it's just a really funny song. Like the way
Yeah.
it starts is so funny. It sounds like I'm surprised you don't hear it at like hockey games.
Right.
That's what it sounds like.
It's almost like
But,
a Journey song. Like
yeah, which is probably why I like
Yeah.
that album because it's like Led Zeppelin's Journey album. But I really like In Through the Outdoor.
So yeah, tell us your reactions to both of these Led Zeppelin books if you have them. Maybe if we get some comments, maybe we'll put up a mailbag podcast. I do want I liked the interactiveness for those of you who stuck with us during our horrible year of Mike Myers, a year in hell with Mike Myers. Um, I enjoyed the fact that there was like some back and forth. So, if you have any thoughts about Zeppelin, or if you have any thoughts about, read along with us with Sebastian Bach. Like I said, we're reading the first half of the book. Um, just take the table of contents and divide it in half. We're reading the first half by the 11th of March, 2 weeks in a March, and then we're reading the rest of it 2 weeks after that. So there will be two episodes next month. I think we can do it in two because from everything I've heard about 18 to Life on Skid Row and everything frankly, everything I know about Sebastian Bach's attention span, I don't think that this is going to be a lengthy tome or a hard, read.
Well,
So
I know that at least like 4 pages are just like a page spread of Sebastian Bach standing shirtless with his arms up. So
well, we'll spend at least 10 minutes on that for sure. So, so yeah, we're looking forward to it. I'm excited to try the new format. I'm excited to be back to doing this, to doing monthly episodes. We're going to we'll announce some more. But for right now, we're kind of in flux. There's a book that I ordered that hasn't arrived yet. So I'm not 100% sure yet what we're doing in April. But we will let you know. We are absolutely reading one of these fuckers a month until we lose our will, just like we did for Mike Myers. Like I'm not
and
promising we're
that
always going to do it.
and that will be the end of the season.
Yeah.
Our seasons aren't in like this month to this month. It's just like how long we can sustain a practice until we burn out.
It's an
So
endurance. Yeah, it's an endurance test. And then, yeah, we burn out and disappear for like 6 months to a year. And then we come back. And that's our flow. So thank you for joining us. And thanks for coming along on this ride with us. And we will see you again soon. Bye.